What's up everybody, Anime Premiere here. Today I'll be taking a look at some of the most disappointing arcs from some of the most popular anime and manga series. If you guys like my channel content, please drop a like for me and consider subscribing. Also, press that notification bell so you can be up to date with my latest content. Just a fair warning, this video will contain some well-loved series. This does not mean that they are bad by any means, just that they produced a disappointing moment during their story's progression. Now that we got that out of the way, let's get started. In terms of nostalgia, nothing beats the Dragon Ball franchise. A childhood favorite and gateway anime for many, including myself, it breaks my heart to put any saga from this franchise on the list, but I must. And so, for our first entry, we have the Buu Saga from Dragon Ball Z. Following the A1 Cell Saga, the Buu Saga would have pretty big shoes to fill. With the series already delivering 3 successful sagas, many were in hopes that the success would repeat itself for the final saga of the strongly cherished franchise. However, despite a seemingly vivid setup to conclude the series' story, Akira Toriyama would drop the ball, resulting in many to view the Buu Saga as the shakiest of the Dragon Ball story.
Who's Goku fighting with? That imp's giving him a tougher fight than I did, and he quit against me.
So, what resulted in the Buu Saga to be so disappointing compared to its predecessor arcs? First, we must dive into the issue of the wasted potential of Gohan. From the very first episode, Gohan was always recognized as the future, eventually to become the strongest in the next generation, and the Cell Saga would exemplify this idea, telling the story of a young boy realizing his potential as both a fighter and a person. But the Buu Saga, well, the Buu Saga would deliver moments like these.
So who are you?
I am the unmitigated champion of justice, who tolerates no evil. Great Saiyaman at your service!
Yeah, it's funny, but there were several other characters who could have pulled this role off instead. Hell, even Master Roshi could have done this. The more fitting tale to Gohan's personality could have shown a grown man who focused on both his education and training seriously. However, Toriyama would shift the story's focus back to the present, relying on Goku's strong power levels to help boost the excitement factor. And with this, we see the attention taken off the future and the eradication of a journey that was near its completion. Gohan's waste of potential is an extremely disappointing factor for many. However, the saga's faults don't end there, as its main villain lacked the dynamicism that made the series so thrilling. Unlike the main villains written previously, Buu's characteristics and construction would never fit the identity of the Dragon Ball franchise, as previous villains were all written with goals that influenced their behaviors. The Saiyan Saga had Vegeta looking to beat Goku, the Frieza Saga had Frieza who aimed for immortality, and the Cell Saga had Cell who desired perfection. While not the most complex aspirations, their actions would correspond appropriately to their goals, creating a formula that worked well with the identity of the main cast and the story's overall theme, hero vs villain. However, Buu was different, as after Babdi's involvement, we no longer had a villain with any true aspirations. Instead, Buu would simply cause havoc because he could, and it doesn't really go any further than that either. Buu's absence of reasoning would drive the story's once successful identity of hero vs villain into one with less depth, plain good versus pure evil, creating a disconnect between Buu and the audience, something all 3 antagonists from previous sagas had no issue with. And maybe this would have worked if Buu could have expressed his personality through more dialogue, but most of his forms lacked any ability to speak. Only Super Buu could talk, and that put the main cast in an awkward position as Toriyama had to find other ways to expand its story. And some of the major changes made in the story would actually result in some negative consequences, as fans no longer felt the same attachment to the saga, forcing Toriyama to rely on other measures just to retain fan interest. The arc would also contain several other concerning factors regarding its outrageous power levels, filler-like story plots, and Buu sharing similar features to Cell. And while mildly entertaining, the story was layered with issues that prohibited from moving the story forward in a successful manner. And for that, it doesn't just make the Buu Saga the most disappointing on the list, but also makes Buu the worst main antagonist of the Dragon Ball franchise. One Piece is arguably the most successful anime and manga series of all time, but that status doesn't excuse it from this list. With that said, the nominated arc from this well-beloved series is the Dressrosa arc. With so much buildup revolving around its main antagonist of this arc, Doflamingo, the execution surrounding the Soluran pirate and his crew was somewhat disheartening. So, let's examine why Dressrosa fell onto this list, beginning with the cast. Managing to introduce many new and returning characters that offered even greater world building based on their appearance and short dialogue alone, the arc would also introduce some rather not so likable characters as well. And just for a quick visual, let's take a look at all the great characters who were involved during this arc. That's quite a lot, right? However, its plentiful cast would be no matchup for these two, Rebecca and the Tontada. Together, they would single-handedly draw out the arc's story, making pacing an incredible issue with many. Repeated dialogue and constant crying would frustrate fans, as at many times chapters felt as if the story went backwards instead of forwards. While clearly having more significance than some other characters, their presence felt forced, as their screen time exceeded their necessary limit. There were several other moments that fans either wanted to see or would rather see than these two. It would become so bad that I actually dropped the anime and would wait at least 4 or 5 chapters before seeing the little progress that had been made. And needless to say, had Oda opted to focus on other issues within the story, Dressrosa probably would not have made this list. To add on with further disappointment, while Doflamingo's crew would not be nearly as bad as the other two, they would be completely underwhelming. And for a character of Doflamingo's status and significance, it felt that Oda should have put more thought into his surrounding crewmates. It's quite a shame too, as Doflamingo and his crew had high expectations based on previous encounters. However, my issue doesn't necessarily come from their personality, but came from their lack of involvement, especially with the top 3 executives, as they never really fought but ran and schemed their way through the entire arc. While Oda might have bigger plans for them in the future, it will be very difficult for myself and many others to look past them with anything other than disappointment. Their blemishes from this arc really do hinder any significant roles in the foreseeable future, and that's a shame, as I would like to at least see them attempt to redeem themselves. However, I feel that many will reject that idea very quickly. And yes, we do receive some outstanding moments from this arc. The introduction of the several new and returning characters, further development in the story, and of course, God Usopp. But these high moments were left overshadowed by reoccurring issues and a failure to surround its lead antagonist with a suitable crew, making Dressrosa the most disappointing of the well-established series. Last on our list, we'll be covering My Hero Academia. Now, I'll be honest and say that I'm not the biggest fan of My Hero Academia. Despite my lack of enthusiasm for the series, it does produce some great moments, making me come back for more hero-filled action every week. Now, trying to view this series from a non-biased perspective, there was one arc that stood out to me among the others, the Overhaul arc. So, why did the Overhaul arc make this list? It introduced fan favorites like Fat Gum, we saw Kirishima's role increase, and most moments with Mirio were great. But, despite having so many high points going for it, the arc also contained several issues that prevented it from telling a satisfying story arc. So, let's begin with the arc in general. Overall, the arc felt as if it was just not planned out in advance and that Horikoshi was creating details as he wrote. And prior to this arc, no other arcs gave off this impression. The narrative felt weak and the execution failed to deliver during several moments. And I think this issue shines most with the arc's main antagonist, Overhaul. Generally speaking, Overhaul was not great. Sure, his physical traits are appealing, but his lack of personality and his own contradiction to his values created a mess that didn't sit well with many. And from his introduction, Overhaul was on a decline, which eventually led to many to point out these concerning issues. However, this poor execution also impacted Deku, as his character really didn't show any meaningful growth and was often outshined by Mirio and Fat Gum, which is expected as I personally don't think of him as an interesting character, but this arc could have changed that had the details been planned in advance. And with that being said, several other factors would result in the arc making this list. The lack of Class 1A, Aries' power is quite troublesome as her actions scream the opposite of the story's overall theme, and also the predictable end result to Mirio's power. The arc's overall presentation felt last minute, despite having all the pieces to set up for success, and for that, the Overhaul arc makes it into this list of disappointment. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. Do you have any disappointing anime or manga arcs? Comment them down below. Don't forget to check out my other content, and until next time.